Ladies and gentlemen, the most exciting stage show you've ever witnessed.
Welcome, everybody, to the Professionals, the rotating show that happens to land on my channel tonight. We're going to have some fun tonight. The rest of the bros are right here. We got Andy Smith, RT Bear, I Need Sleep, Aaron Lepresti, who was dumb enough to drive all the way down to Arizona and have his daughter fly back while he had to drive back. So, not the wisest guy.
I'm not. And hey, no one ever said I was smart. I don't get points for that.
And
road trip. When God said, "Do you want intelligence or talent?" And I said, "Give me the talent, baby. Give me the talent."
Wait, he did?
Well, I keep telling myself that because I
and
don't
we
have.
got Nagasaki Tucci here too. What's up, boys?
What's up?
What if Paul Lynde had the role of Pat Morita in the Karate Kid?
Well, I guess he'd be like,
wax on, wax off.
I think.
Yeah, there you go. I was going to say, use your little.
Oh, isn't that special? Would you say wax on, wax off? I'm game.
Wax on.
Wax on, wax off.
Make sure you kick that leg up nice and high.
I mean, what's prettier, a pixie or a fairy? I'll take the fairy.
We could do a whole show of Paul.
This is the thing that all of us homosexuals used to do in the 70s. And we just try to see how tight we can get it before we climax, you know?
Before you choke yourself out.
No, did you hear him, Andy? He said before you climax.
Oh no, I heard him.
Who said that?
Who said that?
I didn't fucking say that.
Are you suggesting that Fred from Scooby-Doo is a homosexual? Is that what you're saying?
Billy knows too much.
He had that ascot going on.
Yeah, Billy knows too much about the homosexual.
I know a lot about homosexuals.
Lot
Had
of
one as a roommate, and let me tell you something. That was the best 15 minutes of my life. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. The gays didn't tip though when I worked at the Palladium.
Didn't take long, did it? Didn't take long.
Didn't take long till we devolved. Oh, look at this.
Well, we should start off with what
Put it over one eye
happened
like a pirate.
this week in comics.
What a transition.
Yeah,
well,
In this week in comics, on May 1st, 1971, Marvel Comics published Amazing Spider-Man 96, 97, and 98, which they printed it without the Comics Code Authority. It was written by Stan Lee, and these issues tackled drug addiction, a topic that's banned by the code. The media attention from this bold move forced the Comics Code to relax its standards, marking a pivotal moment for creative freedom in comics. And if you look, you'll notice in 1971, that's when Marvel started releasing all their horror comics. DC did their drug thing like 3 months later, but theirs had a Comics Code approval. So Stan really broke ground with that, you know?
That's right. That
So-
great Neil Adams Green Lantern, Green Arrow cover with the syringe on the cover.
Right.
Yeah.
What was that though?
Green Arrow
In the
carrying
foreground.
What
Yeah.
year was
That
that?
vein.
Do you guys know what year that was?
What?
71.
71.
71. 1 year. So Stan Lee once again, it's trailblazer. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, May of 71, and the DC one I think was September of
So
71.
DC's always been kind of the, we'll let them do it first, and we'll see how it works, and then we'll do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we're going to have the Comics Code Authority.
I believe Roy
You're gonna do
Thomas
it
was
right.
taking credit for that, though.
Yeah,
Just
probably.
throwing it out
Hey,
there.
I got a question for you, bros. Okay, so the Comics Code Authority. Everybody's like, oh yeah, Comics Code Authority. Who are those MFers?
Yeah,
Well,
I
let's-
want to know
Let's
that.
take a look about what the Comics Code Authority was in 1954. Now, this came about because of the Seduction of the Innocent book written by Frederick Wortham and his testimony in front of Congress in the Senate, and basically trying to tell people that comics were corrupting the youth and causing criminality and all and lucidity, just terrible things, which none of it was true.
I just want to let you know that Paul Lane loves pre-code comics.
But the code hurt some publishers more than others. Dell Comics, the guys who made Classics Illustrated, they continued to publish without the code because their stuff was all wholesome stuff anyway. It was all done for kids. They were publishing
Right.
Disney comics and the Lone Ranger and stuff like that. EC Comics, on the other hand, got hit really hard.
Yeah.
And when Gaines testified, he didn't do himself any favors. He had a poor performance in front of.
He did not. But he had some funny lines, though.
Yes, but the publishers formed this group the comics. I can't remember what it was called now, but the authority came out from under that, and so the dues paid by the publishers would pay for the Comics Code Authority, and it was run by a judge who happened to also be a very devout Catholic. And so here's the things that changed from comics as a result of the code. Crimes shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture, excessive and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, the gory and gruesome crime shall be eliminated. Criminals shall not be represented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect or established authority. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory or gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, masochism shall not be permitted. So that's basically the end of the pre-code horror comics.
Yeah.
No
And
comic magazine shall use the word horror or terror in its title. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only where the intent is to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluringly, nor so as to injure the sensibilities of the reader.
A lot of these seem like they overlap, like they're almost like saying the same thing over and over again.
Oh yeah, they're pounding it into us here.
Right.
In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds. If crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity, but not too unsorted or unpleasant, obviously.
Right.
Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited. So again, all the horror comics up until 1971 were gone. You couldn't do it. And really, it was it was breaking those boundaries down a little bit that allowed them to open the doors a little, you know.
What do you think in the 70s when Marvel released all like Son of Satan and Werewolf by Night and all those things?
Yeah,
Do you
it was
think
that was
an answer?
1972, 72
Yeah.
and 71. Yeah,
It was like a middle finger to those guys.
yeah. Well, I think what happened is that they lowered the standards. They took some of those things out. This is the 1954 code,
Right.
and then in 1971 they made adjustments to it.
They also
Right.
made
You
the
gotta-
villains heroes, which is kind of weird.
Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities.
Man,
How did Wally Wood get away with it?
Why am
I know.
confusing?
Suggestive and salacious illustration or suggestive posture is unacceptable. Nudity and meretricious purpose and salacious postures shall not be permitted in the advertising of any product. Clothed figures shall never be presented in such a way as to be offensive or contrary to good taste or morals.
Okay, there goes the headlight covers from the 50s.
Right? Right.
Yeah, they did get away with the Phantom Lady in 47.
That was before the code.
and also who's good
Oh,
taste?
you're right. You're right. I apologize. I'm proven wrong once again.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up, Billy.
Nudity in any form is prohibited, as is indecent or undue exposure. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted at nor portrayed. Rape scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. Sex perversion of any inference to same is strictly forbidden. Seduction and rape shall never be shown or suggested.
Were there a lot of comics where rape was involved in the 50s? I can't believe there were, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. I think
I don't think so.
I think all this was started basically because of that one cover with the decapitated head being held in the foreground, right?
Well, that was one of the
Well,
examples they used during the trial or
Yeah.
the Senate hearing.
Okay.
And
But I
in
don't know.
fact, the reality, most of the covers they picked were not EC. They were these low budget,
Yes.
small press covers that were, like that Lee Elias one where the guy's face is melting and his eyeball is popping
Oh
out.
yeah.
Oh, that's a classic cover. It's so awesome. I'd have laid down a 10-cent for that sucker in a second.
Well, that's what was going on. EC started this trend of doing these horror comics and stuff. And all their horror was, there was some gross stuff in there, clearly, but it all had either a moral to it or a sense of irony or a little tongue in cheek. Everybody
Right.
saw their success. And then these small publishers started knocking it off, but one-upping it, two-upping it,
Right.
and getting really disgusting. And that's what really started all this. And then EC took the brunt of it because they were the ones actually making money off this stuff. And but it was really those other knockoffs like you're talking about, Graham, that started this because they were so over the top. A lot of you look at EC's covers, with the exception of just a couple, the covers weren't that bad. Some of the stories inside were, but on the cover they were smart enough to go, okay, we can push it this far. But like the one you're talking about, Andy, from Shock Suspense, where the guy cut his wife's head off, that was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But for most of the covers weren't that bad. But
yeah, I mean, it might have like an undead creature,
Right.
one of those ghastly Graham Ingalls covers or something like
Mhm.
that. But it wasn't that bad.
So
And the idea, behind like Gaines was like they felt that comics weren't for kids. That
right.
they're for everybody. They're for adults too.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was about to say. It's like I could see like stuff that's aimed at kids having some kind of good housekeeping seal. You know what I mean? Like this is a parent sees that the comics code and they go, okay, this is kid friendly.
Mhm.
But there are adult comics. Like comics aren't just for kids; they're for everybody. So these adult ones, it's like just don't put the label on. You know what I mean? Like just if a parent sees the comics code, then they know it's good for kids. But if it doesn't have a comics code, then it's for more of an adult audience.
So the question I have is, because I obviously I knew about the comics code, but beyond just knowing about it and seeing it on the cover and stuff, I mean, was like if a company was like, screw you, what did they get penalized or some shit? I mean, was there a penalty? What was the deal? It was all voluntary.
They were not
wasn't
allowed
it?
to publish it. So they had to send black and white Xeroxes of the lettered comics to the Comics Code Authority for approval. And they would go through it and they would mark everything that needed to be changed. Sometimes it was complete panels had to be redrawn. Other
Yeah.
times they just put an X on it and said you can't publish this, period. So it really cut into some of these publishers' bottom line, and corrections the artists had to make now.
Sure.
It cut into their bottom line too.
Well, and the thing is, this was self-regulated. The comic companies got together and said, we're going to do this because they were afraid that they were going to outlaw comics completely.
Yeah. Well, the newsstands were following this as well. And so there were EC couldn't, they would get their books returned to them unopened by the distributors because they didn't want anything to do with it, but now here's the thing I want to propose to you guys. It's my opinion that the Comics Code actually retarded the art form of comics, in that it made everything so white bread and so homogenized that it became, nothing more scary or nothing more adult than a 12-year-old could deal with, made comics really just a kid's medium. Until many years later, had this thing not happened, I wonder, and let's talk about it. But I wonder if comics would have become more revered like jazz as an American art form, the way the French and the Italians and the Europeans look at comics, because they look at it, as an art form, and as adult entertainment. And we in America have looked on it as a child kiddie entertainment because we dumbed it down for kids because of this code.
Well, the interesting thing is it started off for kids, obviously, right? Because they started reprinting newspaper strips, and then they started doing original material, and of course led to Superman, and then all the war comics and all that kind of stuff. So it was always designed for kids, but then in the 50s it started to mature and say, hey, there's an older audience for this kind of thing. And so I think you're right, Graham. I think it could have grown and been looked at differently if they hadn't been shut down and said, okay, 12 and under. And
yeah, I wish like something like Vertigo would have been created, way, when this stuff was happening, because it's a whole publishing division that if you see the label Vertigo, then you know what you're getting already. So the brand is already like, when you see that Vertigo logo, you already know pretty much what you're getting. So you're already separating like an adult, line of comics versus like the DC Universe stuff, and I thought that was pretty smart, but back then, I mean, they didn't really have that kind of organization and thought work to go into it.
What they did was they went to the magazine rack and they would do the mature stuff as black and white magazines. And if you think about it, like you go to Creepy Magazine or Vampirella, which I believe was 1964, someone correct me, maybe it was 65, but you could read one of those magazines and no one thought you were reading comics. But if you read the smaller stuff that got off the rack, everybody's like, oh, you're reading comics.
Because it was a magazine, not a comic.
Right. It was a magazine, right? And so that seemed to be okay. And that's where they put their adult material. But I want to throw this out here. I mean, I'm jumping way ahead. But do you guys remember when Frank Miller just threw a fit because the comics decided, was it in the 90s, maybe late 80s, that they were going to start putting like T for teenage. They were going to put a grading system on
grading system,
which I always thought was a good idea. I don't understand why he felt that was repressive. I know what his argument was. Hey, they don't do it in paperback, so why should we do it in comics? But it's like letting parents know, hey, this is for this age, just like a movie rating. What's the problem with that? If they had done that in the 50s, instead of just shutting everything down, we might have seen a different evolution of comics.
Yeah, but the reason they did that is they wanted to have control. Like they created this comic code authority so that they could have an entity that would have control and be able to police the comics industry. So it's an outside source versus like policing your own. I agree. I think that would have been better, but it would have taken the power away from that, because I didn't know it was an attorney or a judge that this all went through. I never knew who the man behind the curtain was. I always questioned all this stuff, because who are these people? You know what I mean? We're saying your morality, your take on things is what is going to dictate the terms of how we tell our stories, who the hell are you? You know what I mean? Like we
I
don't
just-
even
you
know
might
you.
find something offensive that I don't, and vice
Right.
versa.
Right.
You know?
I know when I started working in 91, I think the only real thing that was ever laid down or said from an editor was you can't do, if you're doing blood, one, it can't be excessive. Okay. But two, it needs to be black. You know,
Right.
It wasn't
outline
red.
it so they fill it with red. It's got to be black. Other than that, I honestly can't, because I mean, there were obvious things. You know, if I'm drawing a superhero book for Marvel or DC, I'm not going to draw any nudity. I mean, that's obvious, you know, common sense. It was the blood thing. And that might stick out to me because maybe I drew it open and they were like, nope, you got to do it black. Other than that, I can't really think of any, like I never got dinged for anything, but this was also 91.
Yeah, that's
code
really
was
it's falling
much
apart at
toast.
this point.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that because if you look at the comics in the 70s when they started to loosen up on the code a little bit, that having these restrictions sort of forced people to be, I don't know, better writers, but more creative writers to work around that stuff and still present stories that were acceptable to children, but also had some adult flavor to them. And like a perfect example I'm thinking of is there's a scene in, I think it's Spider-Man 143, where Spider-Man's in France, right? And he fights the Cyclone, who's this French. You know, he comes back and he's been struggling with, you know, he lost Gwen Stacy just, you know, a year and a half earlier, and Mary Jane is there and he's not sure what he's going to do. And so he comes back to his apartment and Mary Jane is waiting for him. And she goes something like, "Did you miss me?" And he's like, "Let me show you, lady," or something like that. And he closes the door and we're on the outside of the apartment. Now we know what's going on inside the apartment, but we're not seeing it. Right? And so that was a way to actually do an adult scene without compromising your comics code authority. And I thought that's what I really enjoyed out of the 70s comics, or what I took from them into what I do now, is that there's ways like Hitchcock, you know what I mean? You don't have to show everything. You imply stuff.
Well, it's like the whole silhouette of violence, you know, the shadow cast on the wall of the guy jamming a knife down or something, you know?
Yeah. Like Psycho, or I mean, look at Jaws, right? I mean, until the very ending, you know, it was all left up to your imagination.
Right.
I mean,
In the beginning when her leg is floating down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I think you mean the shark
but no, if you remember, the violence got more, not gratuitous really, but more obvious as the film went on. Remember, they hit you because you went in there with that opening scene of just the shark going through the water. You didn't even see the shark with the opening credits. You just hear that music.
Right.
And that was terrifying. I mean, I was a little kid and I went to go see my sister.
Yeah, but you know why they did, Billy, you know the reason they didn't show the shark, right?
Well, because it didn't work, right?
Yeah, because it didn't work. It broke. Like first day of filming, the thing sunk to the bottom of wherever they were filming it, and they were like, "Oh shit!"
Right, but it made a better film. And I always think that when you're faced with restrictions, then you have to be more clever on how you can work around them and still tell your story. And
I agree. I think like for me, like, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hold on, let me just throw this out. You can make your own restrictions to tell your story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, to have somebody arbitrarily come down and say you have to do it this way, forcing you. It's like when movies, you know, you look at those pre-code movies before the Hays Commission. You know, that stuff that Hitchcock we all love and talk about. That creativity had to come about because of the restrictions they put on film. Right. And you know, I can understand film because that's a little different than a static piece of artwork, you know, just like a painting, you know. But I hate the idea of arbitrary judges telling you what you can and cannot do. If I don't like gore and I don't like watching gory movies and stuff, and I don't typically put it into my comics either. I've always done the
thanks a lot what you did to me. That's pretty far.
Well, no, that was action, Billy, not
I
that.
But don't you
Oh, that,
think?
that was different.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
different.
trying,
You
I'm
needed a
just
good
trying to
ass
put a
kick.
positive spin on it and saying, if you don't have any restrictions, you can get lazy, right? But if you have restrictions, you got to be thinking about how can I work around this and still. So I'm not saying that, I want, these rules and regulations over us, but at the same time, I do think when you get in those situations, much like we talked about Jaws, the shark doesn't work. What are we going to do? Well, now you have to be clever, and suddenly you have a better movie because things didn't work out the way you thought they were going to.
Yeah, but it didn't change the rating. It didn't change the rating of the movie.
No.
The thing is, what you're talking about is I everybody wants to lump everything into the same thing. Like, oh, well, it should have this or it shouldn't have this. Well, if it's for a certain clientele, then there needs to be some way to tell parents that this is okay for them, especially if the adult books exist. If you have a news rack and then you have all these books and you're a good parent and you want to make sure that your kid gets appropriate, reading material, then if you see something and you understand it and you respect it, then you can go, this is good for Johnny, and you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I think you can be creative within any parameter a corporation or whatever sets. It can force you to be, like more clever. But the thing is, I think for me, it's more just like communicating to the consumer what it is. So if you see it, then it's like, well, it's got the comics code. I can buy it for my 8-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then if something's like EC and maybe, I don't know, it has T for terror or like whatever the marking would be, then or like, what is it? 13 plus or, whatever the marking is, then you can tell as a consumer.
Plus, yeah.
Right. And then you can work within whatever those parameters are. So everything can exist. Like the harder edge stuff can exist and the more kid-friendly stuff exists. And if you want to do a Spider-Man that's a little edgier, then it has to fit into that other column, like plus 13 or whatever, the thing is. And then all of a sudden you have communication to the consumer and then everything's above board. So that's my take on it. But I'm kind of like you too, Graham, like where I'm like, as a creator, I don't like any of this. You know what I mean? Like I want to, censor myself. I want to create myself. I don't want anybody telling me like, you can put this in, you can't do this, you can't do that. I don't like that either.
I think
the labeling
this code thing is why we are so superhero heavy in this country with comics.
I agree.
Because, we're not expanding out into other genres except in our field here in the independent market, exploring other genres and stuff that they used to do back in the day because these publishers weren't necessarily fandom. They were business guys and westerns are hot. We're going to do western comics. Science fiction and rocket ships going to Mars with women on Venus. We're doing those comics. Whatever was hot in the market, they would follow and trend to.
And comics were. I'm sorry, Grant.
Let me just finish up, Billy. And I was just going to say that we've made superheroes childish. Okay, and that's why like. When you buy a Superman comic, you should be able to buy a Superman comic for your 12-year-old kid and not have to have a rating on it.
Right.
How do you think you'd feel if you bought that World's Finest comic where Superman gets butt fucked in that prison?
We better put a rating on this show, Graham. With language like that, we better put a rating on this show.
Yeah. Well, the thing, what really started it, Graham, to jump on onto your thing is again, the comics were created, from my understanding, American comics were entertainment for children. And like you said, hey, this sells. Hey, horror, man, those Universal horror films are making a comeback. They're starting to re-release them in the theaters. Kids are going crazy over it. Let's make some horror comics, etc. And then when the Comics Code was created after the Wortham thing, again, instead of Gaines and all, they were like, "Oh, okay, all right, let's move on." Because it was a business. Because they weren't fans. Once the fans started coming in, like Roy Thomas, right? He's a comics fan. once like that next generation of writers
exactly right,
came
Billy.
in, right in the late 60s, early 70s, like, you know, Neil Adams, like, I want to tell this story. I want to do this. Let's talk about drugs, because again, it was such a cataclysmic shift from one generation to the other. If you look at the kids of the 30s compared to their children, the kids of the 50s who became teens in the 60s, it's not even the same. You know, it was completely different. The boomers compared to the greatest generation. So that's when people started making waves with this stuff. I got a question, and I want to share something if I can, because my first comic had nudity in the first couple of pages.
Billy.
With talking about fabric school. There was no fabric going on, buddy.
Yeah,
That's right.
She was wearing was Chanel number 5. I'll tell you that. Story for another day. Question for you guys: did you guys ever work on a comic that had a Comics Code Authority label on it?
all of mine.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in the early 90s. I'm pretty sure
Late
they
80s,
did.
early 90s, sure.
Yeah, they did. Because I mean, the Comics Code Authority really didn't go away until, I mean, it was still around mid to late 90s, wasn't it?
90s, yeah, the 90s. But you know what? To answer your question, Billy, I just think it was something that they put on the cover just because it was a force of habit. I don't think there really was a Comics Code Authority when I wrote.
Yeah, I mean,
there wasn't.
dude, with how fast the books were being turned around in the 90s with deadlines, there's no way they were sending those things somewhere to get, green lit. And
Right.
make sure that
But it was
everything
ingrained in the editorial process. Everybody sort of knew what was acceptable and what wasn't, and so then they just kind of policed it.
They were really
That was my next thing is kind of like Disney had a brand, right? Like it was family. So then like when they put out a cartoon, it was almost like everybody understood what this was and who could watch it. It's like DC and Marvel should have policed their own. Like if Wortham and all that stuff happened and these guys had some cojones, they could say, we see your point, we understand, but we don't do that. Like at Marvel, DC, we don't do that. And we have our own moral code for our heroes and what they can and what they cannot do. And you have to trust us that we're going to do the right thing, because also it's counterintuitive. If we start having Superman, like you said, raping or cutting off heads, that's not the brand. That's not the brand. It's like what's happening with Disney right now is they're changing the brand and they're losing customers, right? So if you have your brand and it's set up a certain way, then there's trust in the marketplace without a stupid label, without any of that crap, But anyway.
So we're going to play a little guessing game here. October 26, 1954 is when the code went into effect. So obviously it takes time to get these books out. The March cover date of 1955 is the first time, or I should say the books came out in January with a March cover date. The first books to show up with the Comics Code Authority button on it. Now, if you look that up, I had to do a lot of research today. There's no straight answer. Nobody seems to know what the first book is, but I do, because I checked publishing dates and release dates, and I found the earliest published date with a Comics Code button on it. And it's one of these top 4 right here.
Interesting.
You know what? I'll jump out here and I'm going to say I think it's Action Comics. I want to guess that DC Comics was like they would have been ahead of the game.
Okay, so
that's my thought.
By necessity, because they had so much at stake.
So I'm going to say Action Comics was the first one.
Well, because you decided to jump the gun, thank you very much.
Well, you can pick the same one.
No, I am going to pick the same one. I agree. I was going to say the same reasoning too, because it's out of all those publishers, I assume even back then DC was outselling those other ones, and they were probably like, all right, let's get on it first and set the stage. The thing that kills me real quick is look how big that sucker is.
Oh, it's covering
the logo on that one book.
Yeah,
Andy, you don't have to copy me just to so people think you're cool. No,
just shut up.
I'll tell you
we have 2 votes
from my standpoint. From my standpoint, the ones I would pick as a kid, as a consumer, is Police Trap. That's got a killer cover on it, and Battlefront. Like those other two, I don't want to see this moping war guy. And that Action Comics, that's a lame cover. Yeah. So those are the ones I would have bought as a kid. But the one I would pick is I want to go with the Action Comics thing because it does sound like something like that's the one that seems more kid-like than the other three. But I'm gonna say, okay, what does everybody have? Okay, so Aaron's got Action, Andy's got Action. Billy hasn't chimed in, and I haven't chimed in, right?
Yes.
Nope.
Okay,
Correct.
so I'm gonna say
I do love that Police Trap cover, though.
a great cover.
Is that a Kirby? Doesn't that look like Kirby's art?
It is. It's Simon and Kirby.
Oh, is it really? I just
You know
can't
what?
believe they covered part of the logo. Like the some designer at the company put it
You
together.
can't
And
even
they're
tell
like,
that's an E.
Yeah.
huh?
You can't tell that's an E. It
No, I
could be
know,
a-
and I'm just like, whoever put this cover together with their little paste ups and mechanicals back then didn't go, maybe we should reduce the logo some.
Hey, can you read what Lois is saying? Because I'm thinking it could be dialogue related. Why it got the code too?
Well, no, all these books
No,
had to
all
have
these
the
books-
code. It has nothing to do
Yeah.
with.
Oh, it's the first one. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
This is
Yeah,
the first one based on the
So it
release
doesn't
date.
really matter. There's no way you can really. It's just a guess. I'm gonna go Police Trap then.
Okay.
Mm.
Billy?
I don't know. If I was a kid, I would have been all over that Battlefront. The comic.
it's a great cover.
Look at
It's a
that.
Russ
Wow,
Heath
wow,
cover.
that. With that,
That's
with
Russ-
an M48
sweet.
Sherman tank on it. Come on. That said, because I'm very pragmatic, I want you guys to know that I'm a pragmatist.
There's no wrong answers.
With the fabric.
No, there is wrong answers here.
Yeah, there's three
Yeah,
wrong
there
answers.
actually is a wrong answer.
There's
You know,
only one right answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was trying to make Billy feel good. Take the
No,
pressure
yeah,
off.
really good different points of view, what everyone's saying. The reason why I am going with Action Comics, alongside my two fellow bros here, is because it's the only one that has the logo that the Comics Code Authority stamp is not covering the logo like it's an afterthought. Like, oh shit, we gotta put this on the logo. So that's really it. And then you guys had it like Aaron was saying, they had so much at stake, so much invested in Superman that it was their flagship title. That I think that was the one that should lead the way. So I'm going to go with Action Comics.
Okay. Well,
We're all wrong.
all of those. No, Art is correct. It is Police Trap.
Wow.
Damn it.
You.
Yep.
Art,
Police
yeah.
Trap.
Art bought it off the stands, and when he bought it, he was like, "What the hell's this stupid thing in the corner? I've never seen that before."
It's right over the E.
Astonishing and Action Comics came out in January of 1955.
Aha!
Police Trap
Aha!
and Battlefront jumped the gun, and they got those stickers on there in 1954. Police Trap got it on. Was released to the stands December 16th, 1954, and Battlefront was 2 weeks later, December 30th, 1954.
Wow.
This is the first time you'll see the Comics Code stamp. And how apropos that it's a Simon and Kirby cover, too.
Right. Who was the publisher of Police Trap?
Charlton.
Okay.
Yeah. The red
And who did Astonishing and Battlefront?
Battlefront is early Marvel. It's Atlas.
Okay. And so it's Astonishing is the same?
Yep.
Okay.
You know, it is interesting because we kind of like maybe outthought ourselves because Police Traps, that would have the most to lose in terms of not financially, but in terms of being obvious that we better let them know that this is code approved because it's a crime comic. So maybe, you know.
Yeah.
Well, they might have also thought it was a selling point because, you know, like the good
true.
housekeeping seal and all that stuff, that was like a selling point. So, I mean, they might have actually thought at this point, that having that stamp on there was a seal of approval and it was a selling point.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a good.
I mean,
look at art. Art like
DC
4D
Comics,
chess.
DC Comics was already doing family fare books. So they were one of those publishers where it really didn't affect them too much. They were already doing that stuff. Superman was already white bread. You know, he wasn't the Superman that was throwing wife beaters out of buildings and you know,
Not
banging
yet.
heads together like he was in the late 30s, which I love.
I know.
Did he really murder them? Did
Oh,
he
you
kill
guys-
them?
Oh yeah, Superman, you know, would throw a guy like, you know, he'd just pick him up and throw him, you know, half
Dude,
a mile away wherever he lands.
You know what I found on Prime last night? The Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. I was watching those last night.
Really?
Oh, they're so good.
Are they good copies too?
Yeah, it looked really good.
Good.
So there you go. Prime Video's got Max Fleischer's Superman.
you go.
Great stuff. Still
Fighting giant robots.
the second best Superman films of all time are those after Superman 1 and 2 with Christopher Reeve, in my humble opinion.
And
I
you're-
agree.
I don't even know if I
Roddy
put
did
Superman
speak.
1 up there, at least the first half of it or something.
This Action Comics cover is horrible. I mean,
Oh God.
I mean, look at that light post splitting the middle of the comic. You know, it's right down the middle.
Well, not only that, but then just so the light post is down the middle. Then you got the corner of the building that is pretty much right down the middle. I mean, it's just like, oh
Yeah.
my God.
Everything
She's
is
cropped.
vertical.
Yeah. She's cropped. He's cropped when there's no reason for either one of them to be cropped.
Right. It's terrible.
Well, you know, this reminds me of perhaps the greatest Action Comics or part of DC cover of all time, which has, I think it's Lois Lane, Superman's girlfriend, where we have fat Lois on one side of the corner.
Oh, yeah.
and Superman peeking around the corner. She's like, "Oh, I hope Superman doesn't see me like this." And he's like, "Yeah."
What about the Superman or Lois Lane cover where the title of the story? I can't remember the title, but she wanted to know what it was like to be black.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Color Me Black, I think it was, wasn't it?
yeah. Where she goes into that machine and she's got her hipster clothes on.
Yeah.
And she comes out and she's got her afro and she looks like Pam Grier.
Yeah.
Oh gosh,
Yep.
that's good stuff. All right.
Superman meets coffee or Foxy Brown.
All right, let me throw this out because Art brought this up, and I happen to agree with Art. I think having a rating system on the comics without any restrictions, but just a rating system so people know what they're getting before they buy it. Why was Frank Miller so adamant against that
Well, who's
when
going
they
to
first introduced it? I mean, I know his argument was
Aaron?
like paperbacks don't have that. Why should we? I mean, but it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, why wouldn't you want that to protect the readership?
I think it's
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I guess my question would be then once you start doing that. So let's say it's PG-13, R, or
Right.
G, G, PG, PG-13, R. Then what panel gets together to define what defines G to PG, PG to PG-13?
LaQuisha Lane.
I guess it could be up to the publisher. It could be up to the publisher. But
Yeah, but see, then if it's up to the individual publisher and Marvel and DC have like a slight disagreement, like Marvel's like, yeah, we'll show a little side boob in this one. DC's like, not an RPG. The parent doesn't know that. They're just like, it's PG. What? Side boob?
And then
DC doesn't do side boob.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
isn't it better than not having any at all?
No, I don't have a
no
problem
freaking
with it.
idea on what they possibly might be getting.
Well, Aaron, you brought up Frank Miller, and I remember reading Frank Miller talk about censorship and the comic code and all this stuff. And I do agree with him here. Is he said what it did is it humbled this industry to its core. So creatively, it stilted the industry. So the industry played very, very nice. I mean, look at like some of those Batman comics and some of the Superman stuff in the 60s and things. Like, it's almost unreadable. There's nothing interesting. Yeah, there's nothing interesting about them. The art's very generic, very, very, very safe. And so what it did is it put fear within the industry, into the core of the industry. So as far as our DNA, the DNA that we're part of, that we ended up inheriting and moving forward, there was always this fear. The publishers had the fear, editors had fear that you can't do this, you got to do it this way. We have to be the straight and narrow. We have to create comics in a certain way, and didn't take chances. And really, until Frank and Alan Moore and some of these other guys started doing stuff that was outside the box, everything was kind of, there was a little bit of push, but then there was pushback. So it never really went, too far one way. And so I do think like this industry is very, very humble. This industry is very, very scared of their own shadow. There's not a lot of people that step up and say, comics are great, we're great, what we're doing is great, all that other stuff. So usually it's very, very humble and very, very almost like we just poke fun at ourselves and, oh, tights and capes, and we use derogatory terms and things like that. And there just really isn't this kind of sense of like, yeah, what we're doing is cool. You know what I mean? Like, we're creating cool shit. People are going to want to read it and stuff. And so on that level, I agree with Frank that we became very, very humble, but in not a good way, in a bad way, where we stopped really pushing the envelope of what this industry could be, what storytelling could be.
Now, when do you think that happened? Do you think that happened like 20 years ago?
It happened with Wortham and the whole trials. It happened then. That's when that was sowed.
That's
and
why
the industry has been playing
business.
Yeah,
but
the industry has been scared ever since.
Well, hang on a second though. But didn't Stan and Jack create something that was really cool? While DC didn't, I agree for the most part. But Stan and Jack created stuff that was really cool that college students were into, and all this kind of stuff with those same restrictions. So I don't know if I 100%. I mean, I get Frank Miller's point, but I don't know that it's 100% true. Because there was a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, you could, just because DC decided to be lame during that period and Marvel decided to do cool stuff, it was still cool stuff being done.
I'm talking about more of like the philosophy, more about like how the industry was, like how our mindset, our headset was, that we were very humble, we were very, like scared and all that other stuff. So on that level, I agree. But like you mentioned earlier, Aaron, you can still create and go out and create amazing things within a parameter.
Well, they don't have rating systems in France. I mean, you could have a Monera book like Click, and then you could have something like Asterix and Obelix. We are a prurient nation. And we're much more uptight about any kind of sex or nudity or anything like that than I think Europeans are, and we always have been.
But they're more uptight about violence.
They're more uptight about violence. Exactly right. And this code was not letting kids have any of that. You couldn't have the violence or the nudity.
Right.
So,
right.
I somehow they are able to sell these books with no problems. The problem with putting these restrictions on is that you're going to piss somebody off, and I found this out like when I was working at King Features and I did the Phantom. The Sunday Phantom had a scene where the Phantom and Diana were hooking up together. Finally, he'd been away on and they're going into a natural hot tub. It's just
baby.
What do they call that? Spring, a hot spring, right? So she's there. She's got all her clothes off. He's got his clothes off, right? And the steam is coming up, and the letters that came in from these people that how dare you have show that nudity? It's like, well, wait a minute, I didn't show any. You saw it, but I didn't show it.
Right.
I had steam coming up and all that other stuff. So you even with that kind of restrictive choices that I was forced to make, somebody's going to get pissed off. I had another one with Rex Morgan. I had June getting undressed in front of her husband in the bedroom, right? So she's taking her pants off. She's got her bra on. Then there's a shot of her releasing the bra from the back, and then the next scene is they're in bed together, husband and wife. Oh my God, how can you do this? It's like, dude, this is a man and wife. You know, we didn't show anything. It's the dialogue. It's the conversation that's happening. And
You're like, why aren't they in two separate beds like I Love Lucy? What is this?
Pervert, Graham. You're a wretched pervert.
You really are, Graham. You're degenerate.
I'm going to push back a little bit on your European example because, and I may be wrong on this, but let's just, what do European comics, with the exception of maybe a couple things, well, even 2000 AD, I believe, was a magazine size, right?
It was.
All of these books in Europe are oversized 8.5 by 11, creepy, eerie magazine stuff. So there was a different expectation in Europe in terms of subject matter than there was in the way that comics were formatted in the United States. So
they were graphic novels versus floppy comics.
Right. So you have something. So there's a different expectation, I think, when you're buying. So you can pick up Manera right along, whatever non-porn,
Well,
European
here's a question too. I got a question for you guys. How many books do you think they actually sell?
I don't.
I'm not talking American comics in. I'm not talking about like Panini that do American, in Europe. I'm talking about in Europe. What are the numbers of, say, Margot and Badtown? Let's just say one of the books. Some of these books we talked about a few weeks ago on Art's show.
Well, Tintin has sold millions.
But now, even today, Tintin is not that gratuitous Manera type stuff. I'm just curious to see how many of those books actually are sold, because they're not really selling them to kids, right?
Because the kids aren't the market. That's the whole point. Is that, if you're, let's say you're a parent and you're actually parenting, which is what you're supposed to do. You look at what you're going to give your kid. So you pick up a book and it's got an exploding head on it and it's got a zombie on the cover. You know what? Maybe for my 12-year-old, that's not appropriate. I don't need to see a label on there.
Right.
But where you get into trouble is when you have things that are purportedly for kids, let's say like, classic superheroes, and they don't have anything on it. And the creators are doing stories about rape in prison of Superman.
Right.
Then you run into problems,
Well, I think getting back to what Art said, I think this is a really good point, is that everything started off as for kids. Like I made that point earlier. The comics were created for the kids audience originally. Right. All right. So if they had in the 50s, for example, if they had said, you know what, okay, all the stuff that's intended for kids, we're going to stick this label on the comics code, right? Everything that isn't intended. And I don't mean make a list of what you can put in and what you don't, but a publisher knows who their audience is, like DC, right? Where you know that 12-year-old kids are reading this book, so we're going to put age-appropriate stuff in there. And then you just leave the other stuff unmarked. I don't know how you'd separate it on the newsstand, but maybe that would have also been a way. So Haunt of Fear is obviously not for your little kid.
It would still require, like Graham said, parenting. If comic shops existed, which they didn't at that point, but the comic shop could work like a liquor store. You know what I mean? Like the kid comes up and he's got an R-rated comic, and the guy says, you're not age appropriate. Go put this thing back. Then the burden is on the comic shop, which is not cool. But that's how you would have to police it.
Well, but the thing is, the problem is with the parenting thing is everybody assumed that those comics were being made for kids. So they assumed they were kid friendly. Right. And when they became not kid friendly, they caught everybody by surprise. Like Junior comes home with Haunt of Fear and your mom's like, what in the hell is this?
I think America. Yeah, Wortham's argument was disingenuous to start with. It wasn't very fair. And he just lumped all comics into one category.
Right.
Like they're all like this, but they weren't. Not even then, they weren't. Like he didn't bring up anything that was like hot stuff. Well, hot stuff, I guess some people could, a kid goes to hell or whatever. What is is he the devil's son? But anyway, like some of the hard version of Satan.
Well, so did European comics, did they start off as graphic novels? Were they ever like just for kids? I don't think they ever were. Right? In the United States, they started off that way. So you had to find a way to transition where maybe in Europe, they were always just sort of like AD 2000 was not a kid's comic. you know, heavy metal was not a kid's comic, and it
Oh,
was
yeah,
never, no one ever
No.
thought it was.
Now,
Right.
RF says, just to clarify, there is censorship of comic books in France up to this by a law from 1949, predating the Comics Code. Yeah, so
It's
I mean,
not working.
I don't know enough about the publishing practices in
Mhm.
France or in those European countries. You know, the British used to publish comics as floppies, like really shitty floppies,
Yeah, they were horrible.
and really wacky sizes and stuff. I don't know if France started out that way and then they evolved, or what. I mean, because it came, you know, it would have been came here first. So, you know, and it came from the newspaper strips first. So, which everybody read. And somehow
Right.
you imagine you were able to tell amazing stories for grown-ups and adults and kids in the newspaper strips, but somehow the comic books needed to be, you know, totally regulated.
Yeah. Well, here's
You
another.
even said, Graham, that guy that was brought in to testify for EC or whoever, he did a
Gaines.
horrible
Gaines.
job
Yeah.
of the argument. So I do believe, you know, kind of like the Frank Miller thing, where the industry just kind of bent over for him. Like they went pretty easily and they didn't argue too much. But if you think about it, music went that way a couple of years ago. When was that? Was it the 80s or 90s when what were they called? The moral majority, you know,
We had rap music, right?
Oh, I thought that was, yeah, wasn't that the
They went after
80s?
metal. They went after metal.
80s, yeah, 80s.
Yeah.
And so like music and then film, everybody succumbs to this, and usually people get out in front of it. The industry gets out in front of it by volunteering. Like instead of having the law actually be written in the books or whatever, they say, "We'll police ourselves. We'll do this." But like I did a panel years ago with like Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee, and Mark Bagley, and I forget somebody else about censorship. And it was the same thing for me always. Who watches The Watchmen? Who are these people that get to decide what is worthy and what is not? Like that's always been my question about
think
any of
it's-
these things.
Do you think it's cultural influence, whatever is going on? I mean, if you go back in the 40s and 50s, you know, you got Susie Homemaker, you got family of four, you know, dad has a job, mom works, stays home as a kid, everybody goes to church. So there's this sort of, it's not necessarily a written law, but everybody has a pretty good idea of what's acceptable culturally and what isn't acceptable. Then you get into the 60s with the hippies and the drug culture and all that kind of crap and free sex and free love and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly the culture changes. And suddenly the culture changes, and then stuff becomes more lenient and more acceptable because it's going on in society. So there is that sort of, I think the magazines, the comics, were always sort of rolling along with culture in terms of what they could get away with. And everybody's always pushing the envelope, right? But there's standards that are set that aren't necessarily written down, but are ingrained in society. And those things change over time, which means your morals change, which means you really don't have any morals at all. But the point being, culturally speaking, what you could get away with now as opposed to what you could get away with in the 50s is something entirely different, and people just accept it. So I don't know that it needed to be policed. Like Graham, you had pointed out that, you know, they were putting adult themes in comic strips and newspapers, but they were never pushing it beyond, because they knew everybody had access to it. When you close that book in Haunt of Fear or whatever, you can put whatever you want on the inside and no one's going to see it until they actually buy it, pick it up, and read it. Right? So when it was in the newspaper, they were more conscious of, well, we can't offend this group, we can't offend that back. So they pull back, and they only do what they feel comfortable. And they're doing adult themes, sure, but they know how to put them out there so that they're not being offensive. Whereas these guys in the comics, again, you have a closed book that someone actually has to buy and open to read. Then suddenly you're like, what can I get away with here, and see if who's going to notice.
I just want to point out, not everybody succumbed to the hippies. Thor didn't.
Thor did not.
No.
What happened with Thor and the hippies? Thank you.
Yeah.
This is so great.
Yeah, they're challenging him. They you know, they don't dig him, man. You know, look, we don't groove to your kind of scene. Like if some cat's bugging the establishment, that ain't our hang up.
Oh my God.
I love this shit. It's so great.
I got a couple of points to go over if I can.
Do it.
One, if we go back to the 50s with the newsstands, I'm curious if anyone knows about how I think what year did Playboy come out in 56 or something like that? Playboy magazine.
Later.
Well, Marilyn Monroe was the first one, wasn't she?
But that was a newsstand, wasn't it?
Right.
Were they covered? Because kids could go to the newsstand and buy their comics, right?
I would think that. I mean, I don't know the answer, but just going by being a kid in the 80s and going to a bookstore, they were always up high.
Well, wait a minute.
You couldn't reach them.
Billy, there was smut magazines before Playboy.
Right, but they were underground, like the Betty Page stuff, all that.
You could go in a drugstore or cigar shop and get them, but they
not really. They were still
right. So
girly magazines.
I don't know, man.
18 or something to buy them. I mean, they were behind the counter.
Yeah, and go to what Art was saying, what Tipper and Al Gore did in the 80s with the whole coming down on heavy metal and all this bullshit with the music and censoring the lyrics. That ain't nothing compared to like rap music today. They're raping bitches, and hoes, and shooting fuckers, gacks, and all this crap. Well,
I think they should outlaw heavy metal. It's just noise. Dang it.
All right, kick him.
Oh my God, Art.
Isn't that the lyric? Isn't that the heavy metal song? Heavy metal noise.
And then what Aaron was saying about morals, right? And now what about in the politest, most moralistic society, Japan? Look at manga, how deviant manga is. I mean, they've got, man, I was at MegaCon, I remember years ago, and there were little kids wearing shirts that would say, "Will Yuri for Yaoi." That means they'll do like girl on girl, like they'll make out or do some sex with their girlfriend so two boys can fucking fuck each other or whatever, make out and stuff. Like there's some really sick shit in manga.
What is that? Hentai?
Oh yeah.
That's that.
I mean,
but do they separate that stuff at all? That they've got like manga not porn? I mean,
no. Most bookstores like Barnes and Noble and stuff, at least for what I've seen, they don't carry like the porn stuff and the stuff that's really violent. So I'll use Berserk as an example. Those books at Barnes and Noble, those are shrink wrapped, so you can't look through it. So they're all grouped together in the whole manga section because they just alphabetize it by title, not even by author. So when you get to like Berserk, you'll be like, hey, these are shrink wrapped. That's because they're really violent, or there might be nudity in it. But as far as I know, none of that really like hardcore porn stuff. They don't even care.
They don't even have to go hardcore porn. They have these like shapely schoolgirls and these like little skirts and stuff like that. Like, it's just the nature of a lot of that stuff is already sexualized. You know what I mean? Like these are kids, with mature women bodies and little kid faces. I mean, it's kind of already fetish like is built into the whole market.
They're all schoolgirl things with little skirts and
yeah, little ties and everything
stuff.
No, and actually, SXX is right. Berserk does have some because I saw some at a convention, obviously reselling. It's not shrink wrapped, and I was just flipping through because I'm like, "What's the big deal about Berserk?" And besides some of the violence, he's right. I was like, "Whoa, hey, he's getting it on. Nice, all right."
I haven't looked at it, but we bought my son Matthew the first 3 volumes hardcovers. Big.
Oh, those big fat hardcovers.
Yeah, we bought for his birthday. We bought the first 3.
Are you talking about Berserker or Berserk?
No, Berserk.
No, Ron
is incredibly.
Oh my God! Violent stuff.
I ordered this book called Kordrath, a barbarian book,
Berserk.
and I thought, hey, you know what? I'll give this to my grandson to read. And he opens it up, and it's just like nude sex and disembowelment. I was like, I couldn't believe it.
I know, it's awesome.
It's like a Savage Dragon
comic. Josh called me up and was like, I learned so much that my dad never taught me or told me.
I like how Aaron phrased that. It's got nude sex, as if there's clothes sex, which would have been okay.
Well, that's PG-13.
Hey, in Aaron's household, when the deed was done for Josh and Sammy, it was clothes sex, Graham. Just remember that.
We had to push our beds together.
Lights off, clothes sex.
1 foot on the floor at all times.
Yeah, exactly.
Foreplay is putting on more clothes.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
How about that Esther with them ankles, boy?
Yeah.
Oof.
Shows
I like when
the
she
ankle.
rolls the ankles around.
I know.
Yeah,
That
that,
cheesy whore.
you know
Whoa,
something.
whoa, whoa.
I mean,
Hey.
Aaron's got decapitated heads and
I
his
did.
little Wraith of God.
That's an excellent point, because the sex has nothing to do with Wraith of God. It just has nothing to do with it. And so it's not in there. And
Don't I know it? I was so let down.
yeah, I know. But there is violence in it. And I did kind of step back and go, because there's in the first issue, there was like, decapitation and things like that. And I thought, did I push this? Did I go too far on this? Or did I? Because I like to kind of keep my material within what would be considered Comics Code Authority. I mean, I've been doing that for 35 years. And so then I had someone, send me an email and said, hey, is this okay for my 12-year-old? And I was like, I don't know that it is. And I kind of wanted it to be. And so, these are interesting things that we kind of get desensitized when we've got this sort of freedom to do whatever we want. You sort of, you don't really think about it, but then you think, well, there still are 12-year-olds out there that might want to read Wraith of God. And did I just keep them from being able to read it because I, had the Wraith chop off this dude's head who ended up being a werewolf? I mean, those are interesting questions that you have to deal with every time you sit down. The business side of it, right, Graham? I mean, it's like, who is this for?
Right.
And do I want to make it accessible to everyone, or do I just want to make it accessible to this group because I want to put this stuff in?
So, Aaron, here's a question. Then, so I think when it comes to saying, your example of like, dude gets his head lopped off or whatever, in regards to like a 12-year-old, would you say how it's portrayed, how you drew it makes a difference as well? If you drew it with a swords going through, the heads flying, blood's gushing everywhere, or it's like the panel, the sword goes, the next panel, the body's on the ground, the neck facing away so you don't see the inside of it, and then the head.
He brings the axe around like this, and you don't see it. You see, like, I think some blood maybe, and then you see the head laying on the ground, so you didn't actually see. But in the vampire story I did, he's like staking these chicks right and left. And when I say staking, I mean taking a wooden stake and putting it in their heart. And there's blood shooting out every time he does that. So I'm kind of like, was that too graphic? I was kind of going for a Hammer film sort of like feel for it. So there is some blood and gore, but at sometimes you think, did I just eliminate this 13-year-old kid who wants to read this book from?
Yeah. When I came up with Chrono Mechanics, because it was a cartoon, I mean, it looked like it would have been a kid's comic, right?
Right.
And so, but I didn't have any interest in making a kid's comic book. So I wanted to make it somewhat edgy. And then I found myself selling it to Hollywood. So then I really had to figure out what the tone of this was, because not only do I need to know, but if I'm going to sell it to, try to sell it to other people, I need to know what it is. And so the best thing I could come up with is like Looney Tunes. It's like H.G. Wells meets Looney Tunes. So to me, Looney Tunes means you can push the envelope. Like, there's some jokes in there that go right over kids' heads, but there's stuff in there that like kids would absolutely love. So that's kind of the sensibility that I came upon. But I do think, like, if Wortham did, let me pose this. If Wortham didn't do what he did and all that hubbub didn't happen, do you think inevitably comics would have just policed itself? Do you think there would ultimately have been a comics code without it being pushed in such a public way? Do you think each comic company would have just, created their own morality? Kind of like what we're talking about. Like, each of us have our own parameters of what we create and what we think is okay.
Eventually they would have pushed so far, which they were doing in some of these books, pushed so far that parents would start picking up and be outraged, and then they'd start losing their audience, or at least your kids' audience. So I don't know. I think they would have probably done more what we're talking about. They would have done a rating system, especially in the 60s when that stuff started coming about, for films. I think they would have done something similar to that so that people were aware of what they were buying. And again, you're dealing with the problem of an industry that started as a kid's industry.
Right.
And then trying to grow out of it.
Let me posit this idea that I think that in Art's scenario here that this never happened, what would happen to the art form? I think that the A-list talent would come out of the woodwork to have worked in this business, because prior to this, everybody wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist because they had the most prestige, the most money. It was, the comic guys were basement dwelling wannabes for decades who wanted.
And we still are.
Hey,
Let's face it, we still are.
No, well, but not. We don't want to be strip guys. That's for sure.
there's only one guy in this whole chat right now that works in a basement, and he's the dude hosting.
That is true.
I know. I'm on the
I
second
am the
floor.
basement dweller. But you know what? I think talent would have gravitated over to this more free art form to tell more expressive stories, which could have very well changed the distribution methods. Because don't forget, we had a monopoly on distribution in comics all the way from the 30s all the way up until really
The 60s, 70s.
80s, maybe the 80s when the other distributors came out. So I think a lot of things could have changed, and I think a lot of the art form would be totally different than what we know it as. I think it'd be a lot better.
Do you think it'd be more like the European books? Like you'd have more variety?
I think it would have been a natural evolution of the art form and the style and kinds of stories that were being told, because that freedom, that liberty would have attracted really great talent who wanted to work in comics instead of having to work in comics.
And a more diverse audience, right? Because the format was, right, you get them at what, 9, and you keep until you're 16, and then you rinse and repeat, right? And once they're 16, they're off. But if you had been able to tell mature stories, and I don't mean that by necessarily graphic violence or nudity, but just mature stories, that maybe a lot of those kids who dumped comics when they were 14 or 15 or 16 kept reading them, right? Because they evolved into something else that was more appropriate for them or more interesting.
And also, like, to your point, like when DC did the New 52, there was a lot of things, at least on paper, that sounded like they had a good idea of moving forward. But one of the things that they did is they made definitive statements that these are not comics for kids. Like they were like, they actually went out and said, like, the kid audience is pretty much dead, right? I don't know why you make these declarations.
Yeah, no, that is stupid.
Why anybody says these things, but they do,
Right.
And so then, I'm working on these books, I'm getting the mailers, I'm looking at all these books, and then I'm noticing they're not more adult, they're just more gratuitous. Like there is a difference. Like
There is a huge
the stuff
difference.
that you were talking about, Aaron, and Graham was talking about, like those early Marvel books, those were more mature, but they weren't gratuitous.
Yep.
So just because there's blood, guts, and gore, it doesn't mean that it's more adult.
Right. In fact, in many cases, it means it's more juvenile.
It's more retarded. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. And so then they went and they signed off on that. And one title comes to mind is it was Gail Simone's Batgirl. And so I'm looking at these covers, and it's I forget, Ed Bennis or whoever, like gorgeous stuff. But Batgirl's getting the shit kicked out of her every cover, every issue. And I'm thinking, who wants to read that? Like, I don't want my hero beat up gratuitously. I mean, she's all bloody and costume ripped and stuff like that. It's like, I don't want that. I want to see Batgirl triumph. I want to see her go through hell to triumph, but I don't necessarily need to see that time and time again. Like, if it happens, like if you go 12 issues and then all of a sudden you have this one cover, where she's all beat the shit out, well, then it's an exception to the rule. But if it's always that one thing, then you just become desensitized to it. It's like, oh, this is another 22 pages where I have to tolerate my favorite character getting the crap kicked out of her. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to read that.
This is words of iron right here. Gone are the stories closer to Shakespearean and Greek theater, replaced with gratuitousness.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's and that gets back to my laziness, right? By putting restrictions on people, it makes them work a little harder, where no restrictions incurs laziness. Like horror films, right? Just being as gross as you can think of is not making a good horror film. But we see so
Right.
many horror films that are like that, right?
Mhm.
Where's the cleverness? Where's the not necessarily the moral, but the what's the point of the whole story is to be like grotesque. You just start one-upping people to see how gross you can be, and it's like suddenly, well, where's the story? Where are the characters? Where are the people that I care about? It just becomes just this gore, like what they call it, violence porn, or yeah, and it's like that's
Well, the thing is, as soon as you guys bring up Jaws a lot, as soon as you create a theater of the mind, like what does the shark look like? What is this thing that's killing these people? What is all this? That is way more effective than actually showing it, because it brings you into it.
yes,
Like you have your brain starts going like, what the hell does this thing look like? So it
Yeah.
becomes theater of the mind. And that's way more compelling, because then you're bringing the audience into your story.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then
Right.
that's when you're really engaging somebody by just showing them everything. And I just want to be clear. I'm not shaming any of that. I'm not saying this is good, this is bad. It's just different, right? And if you're into that stuff, then that's fine. But to have a more effective, I think, horror story or thriller, it's like, do that. You like the Hitchcock stuff, like you guys are talking about. Like,
well, and think about it. Why did all of us continue reading whatever books we were reading? Right? I was like, yeah, you love that Spider-Man fought the Green Goblin or whoever, but my gosh, how is he going to get his personal life straightened out? Those are the
Right.
things. It's like you pick the book up because of the Green Goblin, but you keep reading because you want to find out how Parker's going to deal with Gwen Stacy's death and Mary Jane and these other things that are the character stuff. That's what drags readership. It's not just spectacle. It's
well,
gotta
one of
be
the
more.
things that I was always hoping with Peter Parker is he'd put Aunt May into a home. I mean,
Oh
come
my
on,
God.
man. That woman was really, really screwing up his love life.
Hey,
and everything.
the shock might kill her. Okay.
Hey, you know what? Aunt May was either the sister to Peter's father or the sister to Peter's mother. And how old were his parents? Because
Yeah,
Aunt
really.
May is like,
Well, she was like the really older sister.
she
Yeah.
was really old. Even so, then
Well, you know what, Graham? She was
kind of
adopted.
old, too. You know,
She was
like,
adopted. She wasn't
when
even
they-
blood relation.
when they made
Remember when they
that hot
had
girl, the Aunt May, what's her name?
Marissa Tomei?
Tomei.
Yeah,
That actually made more sense because
Yeah.
of her age.
Sure.
it did.
Right.
Right. Remember when it happened? And you're like, oh, what? And they're like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
It
I
actually
mean,
makes
Aunt
more
May
sense.
looked like a prune. She had to be 85 years old.
Yeah.
Because I also found like that Aunt May was a little like, she wasn't sympathetic to me, because like I was raised in a house like you don't become like selfish, like everybody holds their own, right? So I know that my parents, if they ever got like that, they probably would have put themselves into a home. Like they wouldn't burden their kids with it. You know what I mean? I know there are families that do that, and I'm like I said, I'm not shaming anybody, but I always thought like Aunt May, just check out. You know what I mean? Get yourself
Oh
a good-
man, just
No,
check
I don't
out.
think
Damn.
check out,
Art, you're not that far away from age.
Dude, Aunt May could
You
still get
better rethink
around.
your
She
position.
wasn't senile or anything. It wasn't like check out time for her.
I don't mean check out like just like call it a day and go up to heaven. I'm talking about like
No, I mean,
Get
I know
out
what you mean. You mean Aunt May should go, yeah, I can still get around and still cook and do all this, but Pete doesn't need me. I'll just go to a home.
right,
Hang out with old biddies my age.
yeah.
Maybe get some
come on, man.
STDs.
What a
When
heartless guy.
Peter's
Arnold.
parents died, he should have lived with his grandparents because that's what they looked like. There's no reason that they had
Yeah.
to be the aunt and uncle. I mean, if the point of Aunt May was to have her constantly in health jeopardy that was weighing on this young boy, it would have made more sense for his grandparents to be raising him, and then his grandfather gets killed by the burglar.
Yeah, I agree.
Either way, I never liked the character.
Aunt May was Aunt May was a prune in Amazing Fantasy 15. She had
Oh, yeah.
nowhere to go but like
Oh yeah, yeah.
to the home. I mean, she was freaking 80 years old in that.
Oh yeah.
So-
Barely had teeth.
Somebody should have done that thing like that Superman where like Lois was like wanted to see what it would be like to be a black lady. They should have done something like that with Aunt May, where she becomes more age appropriate, like an aunt would be. Well,
in the comics, is she still old, or did they make her?
Oh
like,
yeah, she's still.
Yeah,
Well,
she's
no,
still, I'm pretty
they
sure.
I think since John Byrne, they've kind of updated her look, gave her like a bob hairdo. She's not wearing the pulled back bun and all that stuff anymore. She's wearing modern clothes and she's more updated.
Less wrinkles, yeah. But
Yeah,
even in the Ultimates, when we
All right,
brought
I'm gonna
Ant-Man
look
in,
and find out
he was
because I
still,
honestly have no
still
idea.
older, looked like she looked old.
Well, if you want to share something, Graham, before we end my screen about dealing with the Comics Code Authority, is because I actually, when I came out with She #1, when I was coming out with it, I made a press release, and I actually sent it out to every press all over, right? That this new comic book company out of New York City, blah, blah, blah. It was me in my 1-bedroom apartment, and I typed it up, and then Debbie proofread it. And then we got in previews, but I actually, let me find the page here. Hang on. I actually got called by someone from the Comics Code Authority in late 93 or early 94 to trying to get $750 out of me to get that I needed the Comics Code Authority on my book. And I had this comment for like 45 minutes. I'm talking with this person, and basically, so they're like, well, and they give me all the reasons, and I'm like, but this is for newsstands. So I'm like, but do I need this to get my books on the stand to get in comic shops? They're like, well, not really, but you should because everyone's using it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so I basically told them to go fuck themselves. But they tried to get $750 out of me. So I had to send them my book, and then they would give me the Comics Code Authority. And that's where I call the Neo Code, all the ones that cancel culture people. I call them Neo Codes instead of like neocons, because they're like modern day Comics Code Authority assholes.
Wow, that's interesting. So they came to you.
They came to me. They called me. They had my phone number on it for all call. Crusade Comics, blah blah blah, was my apartment number, and it was someone from the Comics Code Authority, and you pay them.
Wow, what a racket.
They wanted money. They wanted money. They were shaking you down.
They were shaking me down.
So then it was all over.
Yeah, I'm sure they were losing left and right. Again, I didn't know if Marvel. I assumed everyone was still using it until I asked them. I'm like, do I need this?
Yeah.
Like,
well, Image Comics launched. Yeah, Image Comics launched, and there was no comics code on any of those books.
Yeah,
they weren't on the newsstands.
Yeah, you only needed them on the newsstands.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
but the newsstands, let's face it, pretty much wasn't.
Yeah, that's about, so I would never, whatever. So I made that post in 2020. This is after Dynamite pulled out of with the Cecil cover or the Anna cover, whatever he did. And I was talking about these Neo Codes, that try to cancel you. That's literally what they try to do. So fuck you. Sorry.
I lost a killer deal. I was going to do a Green Hornet Kato black and white crossover story. I had already had a premise for it, and I had a cover layout for it. So when all that shit hit the fan, I was like, well, kiss that goodbye.
Oh.
It still might happen.
Oh.
You guys,
I was just looking, and the latest I could find was 2022 when they relaunched it. And Peter Parker looks like he's, in his 30s, and Aunt May looks like she's mid-60s. So if you do that age, that's fine. But if you do Peter Parker high school and she's in her 70s, then that's like, wow, that is an old aunt.
She looked older than 70.
Yeah,
I know. I'm just, I was being kind.
And look, she looked older than him. So
yeah.
And Aaron, I think my thing for you is that you wonder if you're making the right decision by making your book sort of like PG-ish. Make the comic that you want to read. That's what you like,
right?
So do what you want.
If you want to do a Hammer style horror comic, that maybe isn't, since you've already kind of written the code for Wraith of God, then do a rated R one. I mean, if that's where you want to go. I mean, I did that with the Shanu. That was hard R.
There was a lot of spattering in that book.
Oh, heads getting lopped off.
F-bombs flying. was just incredible.
There was one F-bomb, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
I marked it in red when I was reading the book.
That's
You
right.
marked it in red.
Which is apropos because it was black and white and red.
Okay, so here's something along these same lines, and we talked about this, I think, maybe this morning. That and I remember this specifically because I got sort of involved online, like back. Remember CompuServe, like back when that was like the thing, you know, for communicating online. Well, there was a case where Frank Thorne had put out this comic that had like these little demon cherubs or something, but they were all little kids and they were all naked. And I don't know if there was some sex going on or whatever. And they set up a sting operation with this comic shop, and this guy had allowed underage kid to buy this comic, right? And then they ended up arresting the comic shop guy on, you know, basically peddling porn to minors or whatever.
Right.
Now, I went on CompuServe because I was reading this thread, and I was like, well, I go, if he knowingly, and I was trying to be as politically, you know, trying not politically correct, but just as you know, empathetic to everybody's plight in this whole thing as I could be. And I just said, you know, if this guy was selling adult material to kids, he deserved to get arrested. If that is actually the case. Oh my gosh. You know, but as I stepped back and thought about it, I was like, well, why isn't Frank Thorne getting any heat for creating this? And then, but this comic shop guy who I thought was responsible, it's like, dude, you need to know what you got in your shop and what you're selling and who you're selling to. If you're not going to be responsible enough, you shouldn't be running a comic shop or any store. You need to know these things.
You have to know what your products are.
Yeah, exactly. But I just thought it was really interesting that we're getting the, and this guy was, I don't think this guy was willfully selling. I don't think he knew what was in the book.
Right. You know, you order so much stuff, you know.
Right. But at the same time, you need to be smarter than that.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's like, why is it okay for Frank Thorne to create this stuff and then you bust this guy who accidentally sold it to a minor? It's like, well, who didn't even know the content. And the reason
it's not against the law to make it, it's against the law to sell it to minors.
Right. It's like, it's not against the law to, you know, buy a bong, but it's against the law to smoke pot in it when the only purpose for a bong is to smoke pot. It's dumb. But it's not anymore. But I'm saying that if you had a rating system on these books, that would protect this shop owner who is apparently ignorant of what the content of the books he was pushing.
Oh, he definitely couldn't wiggle out of it. So if it said R on it and he sold it to the kid,
right?
You know, there's no way he could go, well, I didn't know what side. It's like, well, no, it says it right here.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I like the idea of being responsible for your actions.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I do too. But I'm just like, the thing is, like, the world isn't perfect. So there's people that will always push things. I always is like, there's 3 stages. There's like, you can warn somebody to stop at a stop sign and they'll do it because it's the right thing and they want to. Yeah, and then there's a person that you have to find them, right? You have to have police action. You have to take that kind of action for them to stop. So they have to have the fear of the stop sign. And then the other one just doesn't give a shit. You know what I mean? So there's different types of people. So if you're trying to get people to do a certain thing, they're not always going to fall in line. You know what I mean? Because there's too much wiggle room out of it. So if there isn't an R on the comic, then the guy can say, I didn't know what was in it, you know, and you could go, well, ignorance, you know, but, you know, at least there's some wiggle room there. So I don't know. I mean, it is one of those complicated things, and we're not the first ones to actually debate this stuff. I mean, this has been going on in comics since, you know, I've been part of it. So, you know, there's always good ideas that fly around, but I don't think one definitive idea, it's like one size doesn't fit everything. Like, it's a series of a lot of these different things. And the one problem I always come back to with this industry, with comics, is they always want to just put everything into one box. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't see it as multifaceted. They don't see it as like all these things happening at one time. Sometimes comics do, and they get it right, right? Like DC with Vertigo, or Marvel with what was their epic line, and stuff like that. So there have been movements like that, but it's just not enough. So they just kind of get tunnel vision. They do this until they can't do it anymore, and then they go over to here, and then they do that. And I just think that that's probably more the problem.
I think the store owners have to have accountability. The same way when we create something, we decide who our audience is. The store owners have to decide, well, who are their audience? Who's coming into my store? Is it a bunch of kids? Okay, maybe I don't have to order everything out of the Diamond catalog. Maybe I'll only order these kind of books. And if I have special orders for, let's say I have a 50-50 mix, maybe I've got adults too. Well, that are looking for other things, edgier things. Well, then I'll order that stuff and I'll keep that stuff over here. That's their business. They have to organize the same way we have to organize to create our stuff. It's part and parcel to doing business. And I just don't think you can give people all this leeway of unaccountability. You
do realize the industry you're talking about, though, right? I mean, most of these people running comic shops or fans, they don't really want to accept any real responsibility. Another one of the problems with this industry is there's just not enough businessmen. There's people that are like legitimizing their fandom, but they're not actually taking it seriously like it's a business.
Right.
So that is true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, the problem too is, as we were going back from way when it started, when we started talking about the rating system, is that the people that are going to be in charge of determining what the rating of your book is going to be. These people. These are the same people that have destroyed the industry. So you're going to get these same the same usual suspects are going to be on the board of directors, because they sure the hell ain't going to fucking ask Ethan to be on it.
Right. And you get that. You hear that with directors and people that make film, like that the industry itself can F over your movie and the chances of it to be released, because they might actually push an R onto a PG-13 movie or whatever. And then all of a sudden that limits, their appeal, their mass appeal.
Well, again, Jaws was an already.
If you're going to do that, you got to have a broad spectrum of people making those decisions. So you got to have old school guys like us, right? You got to have young people in their 20s, all looking at the same material to find out, is that offensive to them? Is it it might be offensive to me. The problem with the Comics Code Authority is that everybody that was on that authority in 1954 was 65 or older, ex-teachers.
Right.
So you're going to get this homogenized white bread shit thrown at kids.
Yeah, but that's then, not now. Now you're going to get activists who going to, they don't like you. If you voted for Donald Trump, your career's over in comics.
All right.
Yeah.
What he did to Mitch Breitweiser when he had the congratulations, President Trump. That was it for him.
That's an excellent point, Billy. If the Comics Code existed, that's the first thing that they would want to take control of. Like the activists, the SJW types.
Once
they
you
would
give
want
them a little bit of rope, they're going to try and hang you with it. That's why.
Well, they would have authority then. It says it right there in the title. They would actually have authority over you, and that they could dictate what you do and what you don't do.
And they're going to have.
It comes down to the freedom of speech and the definition of that, right? As soon as you start regulating it, then eventually someone's going to take it too far one direction or the other, and you're going to have restricted speech. So you have to just, take the good with the bad. That's the only way it'll work. As a Christian, I want to say, oh, I can't stand Howard Stern, or I can't stand this. But I'm like, if they cut off Howard Stern, well, they're going to cut me off. You know what I mean? So you have to allow all this stuff. But at the same time, what we're doing as a business, so as Graham pointed out earlier, we've got to know who our audience is, who we're selling to, and keep in that track so that we don't lose that audience.
Right.
So we have a, it's not just, let's just create whatever we want. We create, everybody says, make whatever you want and you'll be happy. That's BS. You make what you like to do within the parameters of what people will buy, or you're not in business. You can't make movies and comic books for yourself because you're the only one who's buying it then. So you
Right.
have to take into consideration these things, and that's where that, you know, I guess self-regulation maybe is the ultimate answer.
Well, I mean, that just goes
Identify who
back
your
to your
audience is, and then you placate that audience with how you present your material.
right. That goes back to picking the audience you're going after, you know, and you I guess play to that audience, but you also realize, well, if I'm playing towards this audience and this audience is really small, before you even do it, you need to think, is that really a good idea? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
If, you know, the broader the audience, probably the better. But to me, a lot
Okay, here's something. Do we have an
when it comes
obligation
to,
then?
huh?
Do we have an obligation on our campaigns to, if you've got nudity and violence in your, or gratuitous violence or nudity, do you have an obligation to say, hey, this material contains these things?
Well, don't they ask you that? Kickstarter does, right? Is this for made for children? And you say no. I think
Well, yeah,
Kickstarter-
but that's
Yeah,
such a
that's
broad
pretty
range.
big,
I mean, Wraith of God is not made for kids because there's the violent content
Right.
in it, but it's not the same. Like Wraith of God would get a PG-13 rating. Andy's book would
Will
get an
get an
R
R.
rating,
Yeah, it's an R
right?
rating.
So, you know, someone might buy a barbarian book and say, "Oh, I didn't expect to see this," or you know, or something like that. So, do we have an obligation to make them aware of if there's potential, you know, like an age range or
Well,
something?
I think so, because they in crowdfunding, it's different than on a newsstand or in a comic shop. You can't leaf through it and get an idea.
Right.
You know, they're buying this sight unseen ahead of time. So yeah, I think we do have an obligation there to at least let them know what content is there, so that somebody's not buying something for their kid. You know,
Without, yeah, I mean,
That's
like that
inappropriate.
Snowman book that Ethan put out, that is like freaking I mean, grotesquely violent. I'm not saying it, you know, it's not good if someone likes that, but I'm just saying that
What
you don't
book?
that Snowman book that
Oh, Snowman.
Oh, Matt Martin Snowman.
yeah. That, I mean, this is like grotesquely violent. I mean, it's really gross. And or I should say graphic. Gross maybe isn't, because that's
Right.
an opinion, but it's
Yeah.
graphic.
It's great.
And you know, do you know, you see this cool monster, you go, oh, I want to buy this comic, and you open it up and go, oh my gosh, you know, this is I didn't you know,
Was,
it's like,
was it more graphic than the Shanu?
oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mm, I
But
think
see,
so.
that was something that would get censored if you have some sort of new comic code authority. That
Right.
would get censored. But if you had adolescent gay sex, that's fine. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's exploration.
Right.
That's
that-
the
that-
kind
yeah.
of shit you're gonna have.
Billy, that's just human nature. You can't censor that.
You can't censor love, Billy.
Yeah, Billy, why do you want to censor
I'm
love?
not saying I would censor it. I'm saying that's what would happen.
Oh, and
The heart
I'm
wants
not
what the
saying,
heart
you guys,
wants,
I'm
right,
not saying
Billy?
Snowman wasn't a good book. People are going, Snowman was awesome, blah, blah, blah. That's not my point. My point
No,
is
no.
it's to be
Yeah.
excellent, but I'm just saying, do
Yeah.
we have an obligation again to say, hey, this has got graphic violence in it? And let
Right.
Well,
people
Black and White
know
has
that.
we have two books with Black and White. So we have the main book, volume 3, and that's just kind of I don't know, maybe PG-13, but it does. I don't even maybe PG. It's slightly above G. It's pretty even killed. And then we have the High Octane Adventure, which is, I call it like just a general audience. Like it's kid friendly. You know, the thing about like labels is sometimes it can be used against you. I think we've talked on this show before about like one of the cool things when you're a kid, if the book is edgy, you know, and there's stuff in it that you're really not supposed to be seeing, you want it more. So there is a certain like marketability, because if you say, oh, this is a general ages or a general book or whatever, and the reason I do it is because I know I'm selling first and foremost to parents, to older people. I'm not selling it to the kids. If I was selling High Octane to the kids, I wouldn't say any of those things. I would just let it be what it's going to be.
You would say it's badass comics.
It's a kick-ass comic. You're going to love it.
Wait, I thought Black and White was a nice story about race relations. Now I'm confused.
Oh no, it's anything but. It just really gets into the weeds with race relations.
Nicholas Gear is here and for $5 super chat. Thank you, Nicholas. Any chance in a future episode y'all could show off some of your work, original art that you kept from your careers? Favorite
We've done
piece?
that
Did that
before.
once.
Yeah, we've done that.
We've
Yeah.
done that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been a while, but we have
Yeah,
done
we can
something
do it
like
again.
that.
Sure.
We can do it again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can do it again.
Art we'd never sell, right? That we've never sold,
Mhm.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Recycle.
All right, guys, we're
bit.
coming on 1 hour, hour and 40 minutes. I think we're going to wrap her up here. We've got 343 people watching right now. Please hit that like button and subscribe to all the Bros channels so you don't miss out on notifications of our shows because it does rotate every week. Next week, Aaron will be the host.
That's
and
right.
I know he'll have something wonderful for all of us.
wonderful.
Yes, it'll be beautiful. The links to everybody's campaign is in the description, and the mods have been putting them up throughout the night here, which is great. And thanks so much for that.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thanks to all the mods. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it, gentlemen.
So,
And
as the
ladies.
host, I get to show off my campaign a little bit. We've got Escape from Monster Island. I've got 39 pages completed, so I'm moving
What's this
along.
rated, Graham?
This is rated PG.
Okay.
This is PG, not PG-13. PG. This is
Okay.
truly an all ages comic because it was written as if it was a old comic strip.
So you don't
know.
beat the piss out of your friends in this one.
You don't
Well,
show
that
any
that
ankles.
one was a PG-13, I think,
No naked ankles.
where the bros all got eaten or bitten or scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a classic throwback to those kind of comics we were just talking about. Basically, it's an all ages, the same way that Bugs Bunny and the Looney Tunes are all ages.
It's a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, is what it is, isn't
There you
it?
go. It's Johnny Quest and space
Yes.
monsters.
Yes.
You know.
Well, that's not Johnny Quest right there.
No. That's not even Julia Quest.
I know I say this every time you show this page, but your ships are cool, Graham.
Yes.
So cool
Yeah.
looking. I love
Thank
that.
you.
And you know what else? That copper color is very, very cool. Very outside
Yes.
the box.
Yeah, the Greg Wright came up with that color scheme for that, and I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of that either. You know, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a lot of fun. You know, this is the last in the trilogy, so you can get all 3 books here in this campaign if you missed the other 2, or you could get, you know, fill in the holes as you need to. You'll probably want the slipcase. There's only so many of them, so I would say if you're going to have the trilogy, get the slipcase so you keep all your books together. You can display them and keep them safe. We got a Trumpy cover here. This is only 500 copies. I think there's 150 copies left, so this is going to be a rare one. Grab it while you can. I'm moving quickly on this campaign, so it's probably going to fulfill, barring any problems, ahead of its projected date of August.
Nice.
That's my hope and plan, at least. So yeah, go over there, take a look at it. I'm sure you could find something that you're interested in, and more importantly, make sure you support independent comics.
Here.
It's a great looking book, Graham. It looks fantastic.
Can't
Thank
wait.
you. Thank you so much, guys.
Graham put the fun back in comics. That looks like a blast.
It is. Comics should be
I'm
fun.
serious. I know I sound facetious, but I'm being serious. It
I
just
know.
looks like a fun book.
Yeah. So you know what else is fun? My bros here. I had a great time.
This
thank
was
you
a
guys
great
so much.
conversation, Graham. Nice work.
Thank you. Thank you to the chat for showing up. We always appreciate you guys. And if you aren't backers yet, by God, we're gonna make you one someday.
That's right.
So everybody have a great night. Join Aaron and I tomorrow for our landing party Star Trek show. That's always a blast too. Anybody else have a show going tomorrow? Or
Great
Entertaining show 3:30. Join us tomorrow, and then after our show, you can roll right into Graybeards,
That's right. Make a day
and
of it.
from there,
To
it's
the landing party.
Over to Graham, and then you can go to Pontificators. Yeah.
all on Wednesday night. Excellent.
that's right.
The next night,
Must see TV, as they say.
And what's on Thursday, Billy?
Thursday Night Live, we have a huge announcement coming on. Something very
Uh-oh.
so special. You're gonna love it.
Wow.
Hello.
We love huge announcements.
I can't wait because as soon as we're not live, he'll tell us.
So huge, so fabulous.
Which is happening right now. Thank you,
Bye
guys.
bye.
Thanks,
See ya.
Graham.